Okay, lots going on in my ears. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another day of Transformation Mondays. I'm super excited to be here today. We're going to be exploring two apps in combination, which is one of my favorite workflows to do is to combine two apps in the Adobe ecosystem and find new workflows to transform my tool set and just find some new ways to experiment. So my name is Cyn Lagos. I am your host here on Transformation Mondays, and we're going to be exploring Adobe Photoshop and Lightroom, but more specifically, we're going to be exploring masking tools. So masking tools can be very, very powerful, and I'm super excited to show you how I like to find myself in new ways when it comes to my photography workflow in Lightroom and Photoshop. Okay, so before we begin, a little bit about me. I love exploring and combining different mediums like photography, film, and design. So it's a really, really special place that I love to be able to always find sort of the middle ground, the common space that allows these works to kind of become something brand new. I love teaching. It is a very, very special part of my life now. And thankfully, I've been able to take part in a lot of really, really cool spaces, like here on the Adobe Live community, and also on this wonderful space here on Adobe Live, and also on Skillshare. Let me switch this around so you can see. All right. Let me skip this over because it's gone to the wrong monitor, but let's switch that up. Give me a sec, folks. There you are. Okay, cool. Let's jump on here into Lightroom. I need to have like a pause screen. Learning that now. Let's see. There you are. Okay, cool. Back in the works. All right. A few people here on the chat. I'm going to say hello before we move on. We have Umacorn, we have Alessandra, we have Sam, Joshua. Hi, Cyn. A lot of people call me Sam. That's kind of funny. Cyn, Sam, Cynthia, pretty much. All right, so we're in Adobe Lightroom. One of my favorite things to do in Adobe Lightroom lately has been specifically working my way through steps that are localizing different parts of my photos. So for example, if I want to separate my subject from my background, I love jumping into the masking tools because the masking tools now are very, very powerful. They have a very, very strong suit in the AI technology, which we all know is really, really magical. So we're gonna jump right away into the masking tools to edit this image. So the workflow that we're gonna follow today is gonna begin in Lightroom, and we're gonna continue it on to Photoshop. So you're gonna see a little bit more on how we can experiment with portraiture, so we can go further from just editing to jumping into what else can we explore, and maybe there's a new expression that we can composite with our portraiture photography. So let's separate first our background from our photo. All right, here we are. So in the masking tools, we're gonna find several options. We're gonna find these really cool options here where you can select your subject, select the sky. We don't have a sky at the moment, so there's not gonna be a detection of a sky. It really does read whether it's something that is related to a sky definition. Then we have background here, right? So just backgrounds in general, which looks like it would take on landscapes if possible, but in this case, we don't have an environmental background, so we should be able to select that background fairly easily. All right, so you can see there that we have a new selection. And so we have a brand new mask here available. Let's see here. Okay. All right. So with this mask, we have all of these different options to change it up, right? So one of the things that I found really valuable, especially for me, because I don't always shoot in a grand studio. So this is actually a backdrop that I've set up here in my house, and you can tell a little bit there's some shadows on the side and it isn't quite perfect, right? But it's really helpful to be able to select that background because when I do that, I can isolate the way that I edit it so that I can make it feel a little bit more pristine and more professional, right? So I can go in here and explore the exposure and the lighting settings. I'm gonna lift up those shadows and already you can see how much it lifts up that black. In this case, I wanna be able to actually convert this to a very light background. So we're gonna go into color and we're gonna desaturate this background. And we're gonna attempt to expose it as much as we can because we're gonna use this as a step in our composite, right? So really, really helpful for me to be able to prepare, almost prep my image before I jump into Photoshop. So let's increase those highlights. And there's gonna be some remnants left here, but that's okay because we're gonna actually convert this to black and white for our setup. And then we're gonna have a color version. So we'll get to do some color correction too, but this one's gonna be our black and white option. Okay. So we have this background completely white now. And let's go up here and select our black and white settings. So currently we're in our color settings. You can see everything, all of the different color options, really, really cool. But I actually wanna convert this to black and white. So it says here we can convert everything to black and white, but more importantly, it gives us this dialog box right here. So black and white mixer. So you're able to select different color palettes within the black and white mixer to be able to strengthen the variety of black and whites that you have. So it's a span between black, gray, and white, right? So let's explore how we can. Oh, I have an echo. Okay, let's see what that is. How about now? Yo, the chat always comes to the rescue. Olamide says, want to collab? That's awesome. Are you a photographer? Because I love doing photo shoots. All right, let me know if you can hear me better on the chat. All right, so let's see here. Awesome, that was it. All right, first stream of the day. You know, it's kind of funny that way. I hope your Monday's running a little bit smoother. And hopefully after this it will be, because we're going to be inspired and we're going to be experimenting. So let's see. All right, so on the black and white mixer, so back to this, we have different options. We have red, orange, green, yellow. So we have to kind of assimilate where are those colors going to be. Oranges and yellows, reds are going to be in our skin tone. And then I have a bit of that all around because my background was yellow. So a lot of that color was bouncing, okay? So I have to be very conscientious of that as I move these toggles. So the goal here is just to achieve a certain black and white that you like. Is really stylistic in this case. It isn't going to affect our composite section in Photoshop, so it should be fine. But I do want a little bit of contrast. I don't have much purple, so I don't think that's gonna do a lot. But you can see how much the yellow gets pulled directly on my skin there. You can also use this target adjustment to find the color directly and edit it directly on the image. Yes, audio sounds better. I'm so glad. Easy solution. Okay, so this is my black and white version. Now, alternatively, if I didn't do this, if I didn't choose the black and white button up here, I also have other options at my reach. So I have This section here under presets, we have premium presets. And under premium presets, we're going to find a variety of different presets that are, from my understanding, they come from other artists, other photographers that were commissioned to create these filters. So we have some that are focused on portraiture, on sky, on subject, on skin colors also, which is really cool, right? So if I wanted to explore some skins, but I'm looking for black and white. So there's this styled one here, and it would create a global edit on my scene and add a black and white filter to it. You notice that it's a global edit because even my background is being selected. So that's part of the reason why I like to use masking tools, because you get a bit more control over doing a universal edit on everything, especially when you're working with a very, very casual photo shoot where you did it indoors. Maybe you just had one light source. So post editing with more control makes more sense, right? But I want you to know you do have this option for your black and whites and for your filters if you have that premium subscription, which you can also use on your phone. And I often find myself using it here. It's really helpful to do really quick edits. So back to our black and white, because this one we were focused on our mask specifically. And I'm going to, I think this looks good to me. I like the way this part's really easy. So I'm going to do the same thing to this image. So this image, I want to keep it in color. So I'm going to do a bit of post editing in color. So let's look at our color options here on the filters to see what we have. So let's see, medium skin color. You can see all the differences. Ooh, that one's cool. I think those are nice, but I want to make it my way. So we're going to jump into the masking tools and try out the subject mask. So the way the masks work is really, really simple. You're able to select the subject, sky, or background, which we explored just now, but also you're able to add to each mask, which is really helpful if you want to develop a more robust selection. So for example, in this case, I have a mask on my subject. And if I wanted to add another mask, I can select the person here, which is me, and select different parts of my facial skin, body skin, eyebrows, eye sclera, I do not know how to pronounce that, iris, pupil, lip. So there's so many different options, and you can just add that mask on. So for example, close. And you can see that mask being reflected here in the closed section beneath this mask. So it's whatever edits we create to that mask are going to be also applied to whatever new mask you added within that section. So imagine they're all grouped together, everything gets edited at the same time. So for example, if I do some exposure here, the shirt is also being exposed at the same time. So if you want those to be separated, you do want to then select it from here, from this button, as opposed to add a button here. So if you select it here, you're going to be able to have a separate selection of the clothes, right? So now if I expose the clothes, that's completely separated. That's something that I think can be easily confused. And I found myself kind of trying to discern the differences between the two. So hopefully that's something that can help you navigate the masking tools. So for now, I want to be able to edit this a little bit, and I want to bring down some of the, right here, I'm going to select this one. I'm going to bring down a little bit of, I think there's a little bit of red there that I want to bring down. So I'm going to go into the curve tool and jump into one of the channels. So I'm going to jump into the red channel and bring down the red and increase that blue a little bit. Just bring it down. I think that will do it. And then I'm going to increase the shadows so I have a little bit more detail. I don't really like doing an exposures. I think is a little bit harsh, especially on subjects. So I'll do a little bit of contrast now that I lifted those shadows. And I'll add a little bit of warmth back because I do like the warmth and I think it's going to play a good role in our composite. So let's see here. So that's all being affected by the mask alone. And so now let's do a global edit, and I'm going to jump in here on the color grading tool. And now this is going to affect everything, and go into the shadows and add a bit of a green tint to make it feel a little bit old school. Those old film photos often had those film edits, those shadows reflect a different color, like purple, green, and so that gives it a bit of an homage to traditional film photography. Andrew asks, what do you mean by a global edit on a scene? So globally is going to be applying any edits that you do, whether it's an exposure, or color, or style edit, to the entirety of the image. When we localize an edit, which is the opposite of that, is when we are able to use tools like the masking tool to focus in on a certain section, right? Or alternatively, if you choose only highlights or only midtones or only shadows, you're localizing an edit to those specific sections in your photo. So only the highlights are going to be affected. This is a good example, the color grading tool, right? Only the shadows are being affected by this green tonality. Not the highlights, not the midtones, only the shadows. And I'm doing that extreme version so you can see truly what it looks like, but that's a little bit extreme. Be kind whenever you add things. I think a little subtlety is the name of the game when it comes to Lightroom, so be aware of that. But yes, being able to have a localized edits often means being able to find a specific part of your image. The same goes with, for example, a color mixer. If I select the color mixer here, I have the hue, saturation, and luminance, right? So it's affecting those categories. It's not affecting the entire scene. Whereas when we are using something like a filter, I have some filters here of my own that I've created along the way. You can see that the entire edit, it's applying to the entire scene, right? The entire scope of my image. It's not just the highlights, it's not just the shadows, it's not just the hues, it's very specifically globally. So hopefully that helps. I know that for me, I often find myself doing different styles of edits. Sometimes I just want a quick global edit that impacts my entire scene so that I can hopefully add that same global edit to multiple photos. It's really good for like multiple edits, like if you have a giant photo shoot. But if you have a single photo shoot, you're hoping to create a composite, you have a little bit more time to do some TLC to each image. All right, Reverb says, Ivory and Ebony go together in perfect harmony. Yeah, I think it's interesting, but whenever thinking about color palettes, it is very good to think about the rule of thumb of just maintaining cool and warm colors nearby. So I added that little bit of green because everything here tends to have a lot of warmth, and maybe that's okay, right? But if you do want to create that balance, it does help to do a little bit of cool tones as well. All right, so I feel like this looks good for now. I'm gonna jump into Photoshop before we run out of time because the time is of the essence as always, right? So I'm gonna do that in two ways, right? So we can do one, we can export our image directly here, and I would export a large image, right? And import that into Photoshop. Or alternatively, in this case, something we're going to do is we're going to right click and go to Edit in Photoshop. or Shift Command E, Shift Control E on a PC. So when we press edit in Photoshop, it's going to not only bring, oh, that was a little snippet there, not only bring the image as if it was a JPEG, it's actually bringing this image as a TIFF. So for example, if I was to make an edit here, let's say I do a cool brush here or something like that. This isn't the final edit, but let's say we do that and I press save. It's going to take a little while there, but once we close it, I'm afraid to do that, but let's see. Once we close it, it's going to propagate here too, right? So that's an extreme example. We're not going to do a scratch like that, essentially, but luckily we do have a safety mode. It does make a copy of our image. So no need to be scared like I was earlier. I totally forgot that. So we can edit this one in Photoshop. Ideally, you want to do that whenever, for example, I do enjoy doing retouching in Photoshop a little bit more. If you haven't explored the retouching tools, they're really, really nice. So I get a bit into a flow in Photoshop, so I find myself doing that. And then returning to Lightroom. So this is a great way to keep those images linked and allowing those edits from Photoshop to propagate on to Lightroom. Okay, so let's jump into the scene and bring over, I'm going to export this image I already have actually, but I'm going to export the previous image, the one that we did the color edit for, and I'm going to import it into Photoshop. This time I'm going to place that image. So let's see, let's bring that image in. Sweet. All right, so now we have two images, and now this is going to make more sense, all right? Because why did we turn this into black and white? So part of the reason why I wanted to turn it to black and white and really completely expose that background into almost a pure white is because I want the best selection possible. And whenever I have my hair down is especially important because I have curly hair. Its selections are great nowadays, but nevertheless, a little bit of help from me, the artist, is always very, very good. So I'm going to go into the subject selection tool and just click here. And you can see it made a rough selection there, but just give it a second and you can see that the selection isn't that purple area is actually going in within the hair strands. And if you need to refine that, you can click select mask and select the refine edge brush tool to refine these edges along the way. But in this case, you can see there, it did a wonderful job. And part of that comes from the fact that we exposed that background into absolute white. So it's able to really discern the difference between the background and the subject. So hit OK here. And what we're gonna do on this section is we're gonna bring this one to the top and create a mask in here. So we're continuing with our masking tools, but this time in Photoshop, right? So let's go into this little button in here right next to the FX, and that's gonna give us a layer mask. And hopefully you have a little bit of an insider on layer masks because they're really, really powerful. But just to summarize it, layer masks work in this way. Black hides and white reveals. And you can see how cool it is, that selection of the hair. I mean, 2-3 years ago, not possible. But now it's so easy, right? So white reveals, which means that whatever is in here is gonna show. And I just press Alt or Option here on the mask so you're able to see that, the visibility of the mask itself. Okay, so again, with Alt and Option, I can select only this subject and you can see that nothing exists out here. That is empty pixels completely. Yeah, selecting the hair could get hairy. Yep, reverb with the puns. All right, so I am going to bring this one, very important. Those pixels need to be empty in order to make this effect, right? So I'm going to be bringing this top image into an effect, okay? But we're gonna do it in two different ways. So let's group this by hitting Command G or selecting this little folder right here. I love shortcuts, definitely big game to know every shortcut possible in the Adobe ecosystem. So let's see here. So press 1, and then we're gonna duplicate this group by dragging it over, or Command J, right? 2. So now we have two options there available. Now, if I save this into Lightroom, that file just gets bigger and bigger, but it will save all of these layers along with it. It can get hefty, so be wary of that. But it is really interesting to know that those layers remain workable layers, and you can edit it down the road, right? All right, so I'm going to go in here into the first one. Great. And we're going to modify that top layer. So let's see, I want to change this top layer. Let me see. I actually want to move this top layer to the bottom. And let's see, trying to recall my workflow here. Yeah, so let's move this mask over to the top. So that's interesting that all masks are transferable. And we're gonna create a layer here, and we're gonna create a background layer. Let's turn this one off. We can also disable this layer for the moment, so we can pick up this white in case it's not a pure white, right? And it's right there in our background. And we're gonna fill that by hitting Command Backspace. And now that is filled. Enable that layer again. And drag it over to the second one by holding Alt so that they are duplicated and not just removed, right? Moved over. And so now we have these two empty, right? They both have empty pixels, and there's nothing on this side, which is going to be helpful because now our background is an independent layer. Okay. Great. All right, so I'm going to go into the top layer. And this layer at the moment is rasterized, totally fine. And I'm going to apply this layer mask. If it's a vector object, it's not going to have this option there. So if you don't see it, that's possibly why. So now this layer is completely removed, has the background completely removed, and it's no longer a mask. So that's a step, a destructive step, but that's okay by me because I need it to be completely masked out, okay? So we're gonna go into the filter, and we're gonna jump into Liquify. All right, in the Liquify section, we have a few options we can try, but the first one's often a great one. So we're gonna increase this a little bit, and we're just gonna move these pixels over to the right. And it looks really funny at first, but you can see that there's a gap here, and that's gonna be a window for our bottom layer, right? So we can do something like this, press OK, and you can see that layer changes, right? Now we can disable this layer mask to make it part of the background scene, right? We can also redo this section and try it in different ways. So let's try something like this. It's interesting to experiment and find the ways that your photo is composed, because maybe for you, it might be cooler to try it vertically as opposed to horizontally, right? So for me, I thought it would be kind of nice to explore horizontally, but on both directions. So let's see what that looks like. Nice. Disabled this layer mask. And that looks really interesting in the way that it gets represented, right? And part of it is because we have this sort of reveal element, and that's going to make it feel really exciting to look at, right? Hiding and revealing. And they're still part of the same, so there's a bit of an anchor here. So I did it on the eyes and on the body. You can also choose to do it vertically, and maybe that can look in a little bit different depending on your image. But I found that this one was one of the best. So let's see how I can continue to approach this. Let's try undoing that, and let's see if we can try something different. So let's do Liquify again. And do maybe something. Press enter. Disable layer mask. I think the previous one was definitely a lot cooler. So let's go into the layer mask. I'm going to actually duplicate this so I have a few options to play with. Since I'm kind of working destructively in this case because I'm applying the Liquify directly on the layer. So that's kind of the difference there. I really like this one. So let's go with this one. I think in this direction feels a little bit better. And I increase the size on this one. So changing sizes also feels like you have a bit of variety, right? Much better. I don't think this one's required, so I'm going to disable the layer mask again. Awesome. So I like the way that looks. I think that is a pretty cool way to composite two images and find a new expression. So let's see here. Shahid and Reverb say, awesome, holy smokes. Awesome. So I'm glad you're liking it. So let's see how we can continue to explore. Excuse me. This is why I keep water nearby. All right, so let's see how we can continue to explore a second option. So in this case, I want to be able to try something slightly different. So let's see how we can approach this image. Let's bring this over to that folder so we can hide it away. Same with this. Okay, so this one's alone. It has its own pixels, right? No pixels around it. Yeah, that's the one. And I want to be able to bring this scene over to the right. And we're going to do something a little bit different in the filter gallery. We're going to go into blur. And we're going to go into motion blur. And we're going to do this a little bit higher here. I think there's a step that we need to do. You notice that this section remains exactly the same. That's because what we are affecting is the image within this mask. So when you're working with masks, if you want all the edges to stay pristine, this could be the approach. However, if you want the edges to also be affected, then we have to apply the mask to it. And just like before, we had our apply layer mask because our layer was rasterized, but this time is a smart object. So we have to first rasterize this to be able to apply the mask. So let's rasterize it and then apply the layer mask. You can see it right there. It was applied. Yep. So now we don't have that layer mask, but we do have it available down here, so just in case. Okay, let's go back to that filter and go to blur and go to lens blur. Not lens blur. Filter. Motion blur. All right. It's looking a little bit kind of like giving an essence of another sense of self, which I think is cool. I mean, can be interpreted in any way. If you want to make something spooky, that's totally possible in this way. But in this case, I found myself using this for This Is Your Artist Speaking, which is my podcast, because I think we all have an artist that feels like kind of independent of us. And in that essence, this visual made complete sense. So I'm going to refine these edges here a little bit more by creating, you guessed it, a mask. So we're gonna do a mask, but it's slightly different this time. I'm gonna add a gradient and make sure that gradient is black and white. So in your basics. And then if you move this gradient, you can see that the white part of the gradient is showing and the black part is hiding, right? So we can also do it the other direction. So do it this way. Now what's also important in this gradient is going to be this little diamond right here. So the little diamond is going to determine sort of that distance between the black and the white. So I might want to bring this a little bit closer to this. So kind of playing with those two, the distance between these two sections, but also that gradient. So let's see. Kind of like it there. Let me bring it in a little bit more. Yeah, that looks cool. So I can also move it and make sure this is linked so your mask doesn't stay behind. And by staying behind, I mean, if I move the layer here, that mask disappears. This would be a cool animation. But if we link it, then we're able to move both the mask and the layer within it. I might actually move the mask over so I can determine how much of this section is being shown. I'm holding Shift 2, by the way, so that my layer doesn't go up and down and it stays in the relative section that I had it on. Reverb with the puns. Everything happened so fast, it was a blur. I know, it kind of did, right? It's kind of funny how sometimes you're like, oh my God, the time. And then sometimes it just, it's chill, we're relaxed. All right, so in this section, I also want to do one more thing. I want to go into this little bubble right here, the adjustments, and go into color lookup and look for a different color to apply to the blur. So this is another good example of how something can create a global edit. So you can see here, this layer is applying to everything, right? However, if you don't want that to happen, you can also right click it and create a clipping mask from the menu, or hold Alt and you get that little button right there in between the two layers. And you're able to impact only the top layer, right? You saw how that happens? You can see that little arrow right there that signifies that it's a clipping mask. So I'm gonna change that color. Now it's definitely looking spooky. I selected horror blue 3DL. So, you know, if spooky is your fancy, be my guest and experiment with that. I'm definitely gonna find something a bit more cinematic here. There's a couple of really cool presets that I really enjoy. And I don't know if you knew that these existed, but I discovered them just by exploring Photoshop, as I often do. And these Fuji filters are so cool. I love those little hints. So you can continue to do a bit of editing, styling in your composite in Photoshop. I like that one a lot because it looks very, still kind of within those warm hues. And part of my color palette is those orange hues. And I like to kind of maintain that along the way. So I know this would be perfectly applicable for a space in a banner on my website or on the banner of my podcast, spaces like that. So on that kind of concept, we're gonna go into my library and pick a graphic from my Adobe library, right? So if you're not making use of your Adobe library, so handy because you're able to access all of your assets and files for all of your different projects in different applications, right? So I can be an illustrator and have access to the Adobe library. I can be in Photoshop, in Adobe Lightroom. I mean, all of these different places, and we're able to still have our assets available whenever we need them and we feel inspired. So I'm gonna bring this one in here. I think having a graphic can help it help the design come together. So, you know, I love merging graphic design, photography, and so I'm going to do a graphic here on our background. So let's see, this graphic color is not quite what I'm after. So let's see if we can do some color modes to be able to help it blend a little bit better. We can also convert this to a black and white, right? So we can add a gradient map and create a black and white. Again, just like before, this gradient map is applying to both layers that are below it, but I only want it to be applied to the graphic layer, right? So let's call this graphic. Oh. So I won't only want that adjustment layer to be applied to a graphic layer. So just like before, we're gonna hold that Alt button to create that clipping mask. And so that is now black and white, right? And then we can find a better, we're gonna find a better mode for this. Oh, I think I found it. I like that. All right, and we're gonna add a mask to this to be more specific on our layer. Exclusion. Let's try exclusion. Ooh, exclusion is cool. I mean, really, it's up to you at this point which one feels really interesting and starts to kind of give off the effect that you're after. I just want to add it to my background, so I think in this case, this one works out. Whenever you don't see your brush, by the way, it's possible that you have your caps on. It happens to me all the time. And we're gonna change our foreground to black. So Shift X, so that we can hide away those parts. And we're gonna write font here. Maybe we say something like, this is your artist speaking. I think a little bit of orange will do well for this one. We're under the clipping mask. Let's get it out of there. There you are. I've been typing a whole lot lately. It's kind of funny now with prompts and different, really just prompts. I find myself having to improve in how fast I type in my design workflow, which is, it's just funny. We never really know where things are going to end up. So I'm holding Alt to just change the leading. So the space between the different sentences, that's the leading. The kerning is the space between your characters. And I'm just holding Alt or Option and pushing the arrows left and right, up and down. This is your artist speaking. We're gonna increase that. This is. I love having the contextual bar here just in case you want to do this. It always has a new set of tools depending on what tool you're working on. So in this case, I'm working on typography, so it has all of the different attributes for typography. There you go. And we have our second option. So here's our first one. Oh, here's our background. Come back here. There you are. Here's our first one. Looking super, super awesome. I think I would probably redo this section a little bit so it looks a little bit smoother. But I like the way it looks, right? Wow. And then here is our second one, right? Now I think we have, in general, we find ourselves often working on one program at a time, but I find it really, really helpful to find the unity between 2 or 3 often, but 2 is probably your best bet. Lightroom and Photoshop are great partners in crime. They often get the work done. And whenever you're ready, say for example, if I do want to equip myself with some more filters, I can always save this and it'll tell me right here. It's a zip, it's a TIFF option, and the layer size will get bigger, right? So that's something to be aware of. At this point, you can save it as a Photoshop file, right? Which I have here. Here's a different example of what I did earlier, right? This one looks like this, but you saw it live. Okay, so I definitely would recommend for you to save it as a Photoshop file just because now it becomes a composite file. But if for whatever reason you think, okay, you know what, I still want to add a filter effect to this scene, right? So let's say, for example, this one. Let's let that save. It's going to save that within our TIFF file. And we can, once it's ready, we can close that over. And here's the trick. You have to close it, because if you don't close it, it's not going to show up on the side of Lightroom, right? So oftentimes I find myself like, wait, what happened? Look at this. This is so cool. Wait, what happened? So you have to close that file in order to see it reflected in Lightroom. So what's really, really awesome about this process is that you can always double click and find your different options within that layer. So we can always start over. We can always find ourselves trying to create a brand new project from the same exact file. So it's not going to be a destructive method. And this way, for example, in this case, if I brought it back and I decided, well, I still want to create like a bit of a color to this one too, just to bring it together. So the global edits actually can work in your advantage in this case if you want to make things look familiar to each other, because there's like that filter that envelops both files, right? So something like this, now you start to see that hint of yellow on that black and white. So it's still black and white in some degree, but now it's unified because we created that filter, which I think can be very helpful. So let me see if I can actually balance this out a little bit. I can try a few other ones. I like that one too. That one looks really cool. I named it Peppermint Mocha. I think I made that one in Christmas. That's why it's called Peppermint Mocha. And so once you're ready to do that, one of my favorite things in Lightroom is to export it and share it to Discover. So Discover is a really cool section where you're able to share your work with other creators. Now, this is a hefty file, so let's see how it works out. Let's call it, what should we call it? give me some names on the chat. I might change this later, but let's go for BW transformation for now. So let's see, and we can describe it and say portrait experiment. And you can select different subject matters like abstract, black and white. So those are different sections within the Discover panel that they can be discovered at some point. So let's see, do we do portraiture, portrait, people, great. And you can have an enable preset section so that others can download your preset. So I'll make this really cool preset available to you if you want to check it out. And you could also include the location, my home, no biggie there. And you can allow remixing. One of my favorite things I've done is allow remixing, because then other people, I'm going to share this as I speak, then other people can find themselves creating a version of that design in their own style, which I think is so awesome. And I have this one that I think a lot of people have just found it really interesting to remix. So it has a lot of different remixes in it. Let's see, I'm just gonna let that load and see if we're able to see it as we talk our way through it. All right, let's see. Checking the chat. Okay. Alessandra says, wow, I'm so glad that you're enjoying this. It's definitely a funny thing to find yourself like experimenting within two different applications. But I think the key element is always going to be to try it out, experiment, and find the way that works for you best. Because for me, the duality of two apps works perfectly whenever I'm trying to just kind of get in the zone and experiment and not work destructively and try something new and try to express some of the concepts that I'm already working on, like, for example, my podcast. So if you're trying to do that, definitely explore Lightroom and Photoshop together. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. This didn't upload yet, but definitely check out the Discover page and see if, let's see if I can show it to you just before we fly out of here. It's taking a little while, folks. So I'm just gonna let that go. Let's see. That's okay. All right, so definitely check out the Discover page. That's going to be uploading on the Discover page, and you can download the preset and remix it yourself. And I hope this was inspiring to develop your own portraitures and experiment in different styles and applications. My name is Cyn Lagos. Thank you for being here, and see you next time.